In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast with Greg Gaston. Hope everybody had an outstanding Thanksgiving. Now back to the grind. Busy time for University of Memphis athletics. We are talking Tigers basketball on this podcast with Parth Upadhyaya, Tigers basketball beat writer, and Tim Buckley, Daily Memphian deputy sports editor and senior writer. Yesterday, which was Tuesday, we recorded the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with myself and Frank Bonner for football, Tim Buckley as well. And you can listen to that podcast about 25 to 30 minutes long. We covered a lot of different bases. Again, it was published on Tuesday, so check out the football podcast separated this week and only this week from this basketball podcast. All right, Parth, welcome back. Hope you had a great time in the Bahamas. Certainly, I think there was availability, a little opportunity to get a little R&R, but a lot of work down there to watch the Tigers play 3 games.
Yeah, no doubt. Just a few hours on the beach, walking around before my flight. That was, I guess, on Sunday, or Saturday rather, is when I kind of got that sun time there. But a lot of basketball, a lot of fun, nonetheless. Great time down there.
I know you had a recent vacation, Tim, but you're probably a little jealous. You didn't get to go to the Bahamas, right?
I went to a beach.
Yeah, but it's not the Bahamas.
It wasn't the Bahamas. Parth's on island time.
He's on island time?
It got cold here, man. Like I got off my flight, obviously from the Bahamas to Newark to here. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, right? Like dressed like I'm supposed to be on a beach somewhere, and it's like chilly. It's like 40 degrees out here.
Oh, it's the end of November, almost December, for goodness sake.
It wasn't 40 when I left here last week.
No,
it
was a big drop.
Because, by the way, it makes perfect sense to fly from Memphis to Newark to the Bahamas.
Oh, don't get me started as far as that's concerned.
I used to fly from Salt Lake to Memphis, and I would leave Salt Lake, fly over the Memphis airport, see it out my window, then fly to Atlanta, change planes, and fly back to Memphis.
It's ridiculous.
To get to Memphis.
Yeah, I had one of those deals with Little Rock and Memphis. I was like, can't I just get off the plane here? No, you can't get off the plane here. So it is what it is. But a very successful trip for the Tigers as they win 2 out of 3 in the battle for Atlantis. They make it all the way to the championship game before falling to Villanova 79-63. They opened up with a win over Michigan 71-67, then followed that up with a win over nationally ranked Arkansas 84-79. And then, as I mentioned, they lose to Villanova in a game in which they really never were in it, trailing at the half 44-16. But overall, 2 wins and 1 loss. Before we talk about what's ahead, before we talk about where they stand as far as national rankings, I would assume, Parth, that you would deem this a successful trip for Memphis?
Absolutely. I mean, you ask any Tigers fan or ask any media member to analyze, before the season, right? Like Memphis is going to go to the battle for Atlantis and come out 2-1 and get to the title game. I think anybody would take that, right? And deem that to be successful. It sucks a little bit, and it's not the Tigers' fault, but the wins that they've accumulated have lost luster, right? Like, and we can get into that a little bit more. Were you going to say something? Sorry.
No. I'm just looking at you going, you're absolutely right. I mean, because they have lost games. They have followed up and lost. Villanova, Arkansas.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Those teams had lost coming in, Arkansas to UNC Greensboro, Michigan to Long Beach State. You lose to Memphis, which is obviously good for Memphis. They pick up those wins, and then those teams proceed to lose more games, right? Arkansas loses to North Carolina in blowout fashion. Michigan, I believe, beats Stanford, but then gets blown out by Texas Tech. Like, those are not good losses, so to speak. No loss is a good loss, but you get what I'm saying.
Tim, we've seen the Tigers with opportunities under Penny Hardaway in these big tournaments early in the season around the holidays to go in there and do some damage. And they really, quite frankly, haven't been able to do so. They normally lose that first game, and then they're in the losers bracket. This is finally one where they went in there, they took care of business, they got themselves into the championship game. So even though, as Parth just said, the teams have subsequently lost some games. Even Missouri, which wasn't part of the tournament, Missouri lost and followed up with a loss after Memphis beat them. But I think it's a net positive, without question, for Memphis to go in there and to take 2 or 3.
I think these tournaments are about 2 things. 1 is toughening yourself up, and 2 is resume building. I think they definitely toughened themselves up because, I mean, it was strong competition no matter what their record is now. And I do think that they built their resume maybe more than they realize now, because I think Arkansas is, going to bounce back and be probably a quad one type game. Whether, those other two are quad one, quad two, whatever, they're solid outings against quality programs. It's not like and I'll just pull somebody out of the air, Illinois, who goes and plays a bunch of cupcakes and then gets nationally ranked.
Right. Which leads me into that next question about not being ranked again. Sure. Last week, they were 26th if you stretch the top 25 out.
2 weeks in a row,
points.
They were 26th.
Right,
yes.
but I'm talking about last week, and I said, okay, all right. Then they go and do what they did in the Bahamas. I thought for sure they would be top 25. Now, you have a vote in the AP poll. You had them number 25. How surprised were you that your fellow voters didn't follow suit, and Memphis, once again, as you said, finishes just on the outside looking in 26th?
A little surprised, but not as shocked as some Tigers fans might be, right? I voted them 25th, but I even told Tim, and I put it in my how I voted column, that I was on the fence, whether to, have them at 25th, maybe 24th, depending on how those, how you look at those last couple teams in, or maybe even on the outside looking in at 26, 27. I think Memphis' body of work, it doesn't automatically, kind of etch them into the top 25, in my opinion. They're 38th in KenPom, right? You've got those, the 3 wins that we mentioned, Missouri, Arkansas, and Michigan. Missouri, so they're 91st in KenPom.
Right.
Missouri is. Arkansas has fallen. We thought Arkansas was going to be, a top 15 team in the country, right? Going into the season. They were 14th in KenPom. Now they're sitting at, 50-something. Same thing with Michigan. Michigan was trending upward until the loss to Long Beach State. And then they, now they sit closer to 50, 60 as well. So I think if you look at, just the amount of, or the type of victories they don't really have one that you can say, oh, that's a guaranteed tournament team.
Illinois, to your point.
But then again, you've got teams like Illinois.
They beat Western Illinois, the Leathernecks. That was their only game they played this past week. They beat Western Illinois. Memphis goes out and beats Michigan and Arkansas, loses to Villanova. And here comes Illinois jumping over them, and they're in the top 25. That makes no sense. I know the polls don't really matter now, but for the sake of discussion, it's a hot topic around here. That makes no sense whatsoever, Tim.
I looked at who was above them and figured there'd be at least one, maybe two that dropped out, the first certain being USC, and they did drop out. And then I looked at the teams behind them. And for the record, I was the one who made the case, or I actually told Parth, look, I'm going to make the case for why Memphis should be 25. And then he told me I was loco. And then I went ahead and I wrote it anyway. And then he was, giving me all these KenPom stats for about half an hour's worth of KenPom stats, why they shouldn't be. And then he goes and ranks them 25. But
I did say they were close, though. I said that same message. I said they'd be 26th, 27th. Yes.
But anyway, I'm looking at who's going to fall out. And then I'm looking at who's behind them. And I knew Oklahoma would probably jump ahead of them. BYU, maybe possibly. I did not have Illinois on my bingo card for leapfrogging Memphis. Villanova was another one that you knew that was going to happen. But Illinois just shocked me. And it happened in the coaches poll too, which is not really the coaches poll. It's the sports information directors poll. Because if folks don't know out there, usually how it goes, not in every case, but usually how it goes is the coaches put their name as they have a vote in the poll. The sports information directors do all the work and look it all up. They show the coach a piece of paper and they say, here's what I got. Do you approve it? And usually the coach will look at it and say, did you mess any of this up? And the SID will say no. And the coach will be like, fine, I got bigger things to worry about. But same thing. Illinois ends up in the coaches poll too. You take that out of there and Memphis is the top 25 team that it arguably at a minimum deserves to be.
1,000%. I agree with that. Go ahead.
I think personally, because they were getting shellacked in the first half of that game against Villanova, 44-16, that some of these people either saw some of the highlights, watched some of the game, or just saw the score and decided, I don't know about Memphis. And for whatever reason, they ended up 26th and outside the top 25 poll. If that was a competitive game in the first half, which it was in the second half, then I think maybe Memphis gets in. If they had won that game, just for giggles here, if they had won that game, where would they be ranked this week?
22, 23.
That's it?
19th, 20th, around there.
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
They'd be ranked definitely, I think, better than 22nd. Right?
I agree with you that some of those people with votes probably watched the first half, saw them getting shellacked, and didn't stick with it. But then I also think there's probably some people who, and I know how that it goes with the voting too. Some of them probably gave Memphis a little bit of a break because the score at the end didn't look as lopsided as that game really was. Yeah. And the way that some of those people vote on their polls is they look at their last poll, they see who won, they see who lost. And if, somebody lost to somebody good, they might move them down a notch. If somebody got crushed, based not on what they actually happened in the game, but based on what the final score is, because they're not watching the games.
That's true. What did Penny have to say after it was all said and done? They had gone 2-1 in the tournament. What did he say about his team's performance?
Yeah, he was mainly disappointed in himself. He said multiple times after that Villanova game that, he takes full accountability for the first half and what happened. He was super happy and encouraged by the fight, right, that his team showed. And he knows they have work to do in terms of rebounding, in terms of 3-point defense and other aspects of that game that, were ugly.
All right. I want to get back to that point about the weaknesses, but I want to talk about the positives first because I'm a half full kind of guy, Tim. I don't know about you.
I've noticed that.
I'm a half full kind of guy. What are we seeing from this team that really excites you and should excite the fan base?
Quinterly. You need a point guard. Quinterly is a legit point guard. He's a leader. He's experienced. Mm-hmm. He can get to the basket, but he knows that his first job is to distribute. He understands pace of play. He seems like a good teammate, and he's a great building block.
Parth?
David Jones, man. We knew he was a scorer, right, coming in, but we didn't know he was this type of scorer. I thought, looking at his numbers from last season at St. John's and the 2 seasons before that at DePaul, that this guy's kind of a shot chucker. You look at the percentages, they're not great, right? He was shooting under 30% from three. He wasn't, he's barely cracking 40% from the field, right? This season, he's averaging 17.8 points, still early, but shooting, 44% from three. And that's with 6 attempts per game. So this is a guy who can score from the outside, from the inside, can distribute, can rebound. He's the best, pound for pound, he's the best rebounder on this team, and might be one of the best on-ball defenders as well.
And it helps him. It frees him up that there's other legit scorers on that team because teams can't cheat on him because they have enough scoring depth.
Yeah, there are a lot of legit scorers. Are there a lot of legit shooters? Last year we had Kendrick Davis. They had Kendrick Davis. Are there enough three-point shooters? They're off to a great start. They're shooting the ball well. We saw what Ashton Hardaway can add with the game that he played against Michigan. But are they a better three-point shooting team this year than they were last year?
By a mile. And a mile might be an understatement. It's not even close. Last year, you talked about Kendrick Davis. He's your primary ball handler. So it's tough when your primary ball handler is also your best three-point threat, right? That's a tough dynamic. Keontae Kennedy came along, but then he punches a wall, right? So then he's out in the key stretch of the end of the season. DeAndre Williams could shoot it, but he wasn't really shooting a lot of threes. He was shooting a high percentage of them, but he wasn't shooting a ton. This team, man, you got David Jones. We just mentioned him, above 40%. You've got
Walton.
You've got Jaquan Walton, who's shooting the lights out as well. We saw what Ashton Hardaway could do in just one game, but still, you can see the potential there. Javon Quinterly can shoot it. And you've also got guys like Jonathan Pierre, who, if you want to put him in there for 5-10 minutes, he can put up a 2 or 1 or 2 threes a game.
Even Jordan can step behind the line.
Exactly.
Right?
We just named 8 guys that have the potential to shoot threes, and you just couldn't say that about last year's team.
Are there NBA players on this roster?
To be determined. I thought Kendrick Davis was an into the bench type guy.
On an NBA roster.
On an NBA roster. He's right now, a borderline G League,
He's G League guy right now.
Yeah. But, with the shot of being at the end of the bench, I think there's guys on this team more talented than Kendrick Davis. Quinterly being one of them. His knee history might, factor into all of that.
Right.
David Jones, he's one of those tweener type guys to me at the next level. So it'll be interesting to see if he has a shot. Jordan Brown came to Memphis in part because there really wasn't, a pro future at the level that he wanted. So he came here to hone his game. We can talk more about him later too. But there's not lottery talent on this team, and there's probably not end of the first round talent. But is there some guy who can end up on a two-way and then carve out a career, perhaps?
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a ton of great college basketball players on this roster, right? NBA talent, I'm not sure. Are there pros? Will these guys get paid to play basketball? Absolutely. I think David Jones is going to get paid to play basketball. I think Jaquan Walton, Caleb Mills, Javon Quinterly, these guys are going to be able to play the game of basketball to feed their families. Will it be in the NBA? I'm not sure. I don't see it yet. Mm-hmm. There's one name that, this might kind of throw us all off here, but Jonathan Pierre, don't look now, but that's the guy that if you're walking in a gym, you don't know anything about these guys, you don't know their names, like somebody tells you, hey, point to the guy who looks most like an NBA prospect, it's going to be Jonathan Pierre. The guy's 6'11", long, has guard-like skills at that height.
Right.
He's one of the best passers on the team. It may not happen after this season because he's not going to play enough, quite frankly, but if he sticks around, not this upcoming 24 draft, but the 25 draft, I could see him, being a second rounder, late first rounder potentially.
Yeah, he has potential. He has a long way to go. All right. So Tim brought up Jordan Brown. Let's talk about some of the weaknesses so far with this team. Obviously, we're going to get into rebounding, offensive rebounding, lack thereof, and then what they're giving up on the boards. And a lot of that has to do with the bigs. And right now, it doesn't appear that Jordan Brown has the motor that he needs. I think it's there somewhere, but it's not evident. Obviously, you know what you're getting with Malco as a backup big. But they are, I think, right now behind. If they're playing any team that has bigs, for example, Connecticut, the defending national champions, with what they have. Florida Atlantic has size as well. I'm a little concerned about what's going on with Brown. He was brought in to be a guy that was his back to the basket, get him the ball, play inside out. But he wasn't even on the floor much in a couple of those games in the Bahamas. So what is the problem with that? It's
hard to know. People can look from the outside and say, oh, he's being, he lacks a motor, he's being lazy. We just don't know these things, right? He could just be out of shape, which Penny said over the summer, when he got JB in the program, that he needed to lose 20, 25 pounds just to be a contributor, or to be at to contribute at the level that he would have liked Jordan Brown to contribute at. Has he gotten there physically? I'm not sure. It doesn't look like it, right? He doesn't look quite as out of shape as he was in the DR back in August, but he's only playing 14, 15 minutes a game.
I've watched a lot of Jordan Brown basketball because he played for the Raging Cajuns when I was covering Louisiana.
Right.
Obviously, as he can dominate against Sunbelt competition. He needs to sharpen his elbows. He is not, for the game that he has and the size that he has, he doesn't play with nearly as much physicality as you would think that he's capable of. Sometimes it just doesn't seem like it's in his nature. Sometimes it seems like he is and he just isn't bringing it. And then sometimes he does bring it. So it's a matter of like bringing it all the time with him. He can actually step back and hit a few shots.
He's not playing with an edge.
Now. He's not. And when it got super physical, he backed off a little bit. Wow. All that being said, he's a former Pac-12 sixth man of the year.
Yes.
He can play at a high level, especially now that he's a little older, a little more experienced, a little stronger, if not more fit. He's capable of playing at that level, but they waited a while before figuring out what they were going to do with Malcolm Dandridge. They also went a long stretch without knowing whether or not Jordan Brown was going to be available for the first semester. I think in their ideal world, Jordan Brown was what Malcolm Dandridge is now for them with DeAndre Williams on the floor. And if you have that, man, you're looking at a potential top 15, top 10 team. But now you're asking Jordan Brown to take DeAndre Williams minutes, and you're asking Malcolm Dandridge to take Jordan Brown's minutes, and there's a difference in all of that.
Yeah, I agree. Look, the ship has sailed. The DeAndre Williams ship has sailed. But Jordan Brown, there are going to be games against bigs that he's going to have to come through. Now, Ole Miss, we'll talk about in a second. You don't have to go. In fact, you'll probably go small in a game against Ole Miss. Cisse, I don't believe, is eligible yet. They do have Sharp, but Sharp's not a real offensive force. So you can go smaller, get up and down the court, and beat them up and down in transition. But there are going to be games that you're going to have to get something from your bigs. And so far, I would say Jordan Brown has been a disappointment.
A little bit. And, Tim made the point that he feels that if DeAndre Williams was in the fold, it'd be obviously DeAndre, Jordan Brown, then Malcolm,
makes sense,
right?
Yeah.
It makes sense, but the fact that we're talking about Jordan Brown and Malcolm Dandridge in the same sentence is the issue, right? Jordan Brown is supposed to be an elite talent, one of the best big men in college basketball. Those were the expectations. And,
right.
The fact that he's playing 14.7 minutes a game kind of grouped together with Jaden Hardaway, Malcolm Dandridge, and Jalen Young, like that's an issue, man.
He also has a tendency to pick up quick fouls.
Right.
It's not DeAndre Williams-esque fashion, but he's got to be careful to stay out of foul trouble because he does not play well with fouls.
But I don't think that was the situation in the games that he did not play big minutes. It was just he was ineffective.
He was ineffective.
And it went smaller.
He was ineffective. And then that last game against Villanova, not only was he ineffective, but Malcolm Dandridge had two or three fouls, I believe, in the first half. So that played both of those guys off the floor. Now you got Nick Jourdain, who is, in terms of physicality, in terms of motor, is everything you want in Jordan Brown, right? This guy who plays tough. He got freaking elbowed in the nose against Arkansas, blood running down his face, and he's still playing. But when Nick Jourdain is your only big on the floor, he's what, 6'8"? Like you're at a size disadvantage,
right. By the way, did you confirm, did he get stitches?
He did.
He did get stitches. Yeah, he's a tough kid. All right, so the biggest problem that needs to be addressed is rebounding. Offensive rebounding, they're lacking. They're giving up way too many second chance opportunities to their opponents. And it's not just against the top caliber teams that they played in the Bahamas. This is against, with all due respect, Jackson State, Alabama State. It even happened in the exhibition games. We saw that happen against Lane and Lemoyne Owen. What is the problem, Parth?
I think it's everything we just discussed, right? Like the fact that we're not, they're not able to play Jordan Brown, starters minutes right now. That's an issue. Malcolm Dandridge getting into foul trouble. That's an issue. And if those are your only two bigs and you can't play them, that's
But don't your guards and your small forwards and your strong forward, power forwards, Tim, don't they have to jump in and do their share of rebounding the basketball?
Do I look like a rebounding coach?
I don't know. I think you can go in the lane and tussle a little bit.
I got thrown out of a CYO one time for
what?
throwing an elbow.
Did you really?
Yeah, on a rebound.
See, I told you could do that stuff.
David Jones, I think, is actually pretty good at fouling his own shot.
He's their best rebounder.
Yeah,
6.2 rebounds a game. David Jones.
He's solid. Is some of it effort? Perhaps.
Yes.
Is some of it coaching? Perhaps. Is some of it innate? Perhaps. The best rebounder that I ever watched on a regular basis in the NBA was Paul Millsap.
Oh, gosh. He was great.
Paul Millsap did not have a ton of hops. Paul Millsap was not the tallest guy in the world. Paul Millsap was just like a secret mathematician and understanding angles and knowing how, when, and where the ball was going to come off the rim.
Barkley was the same.
Yeah, yeah. And he thrived off of it. He carved out an incredible career off of it. And I don't know how you coach that. I don't know how you teach that. I don't know how you acquire that, but it helps to have more of that.
Can you explain what you meant by coaching right there?
Trying to coach angles.
So maybe it's not being done in practice
I don't know.
Or done well enough?
If it's not, that could be a factor. I don't know whether it is or not.
You know what's interesting? They don't have really, and I know it's not an NBA coaching staff where they have 400 dudes.
Right.
But they don't really have a coach that really is a guy who played the game and is a big dude.
There's somebody out there looking for that kind of role.
Who was around for a little while.
He's open, he wants to be a part of the staff. He said it.
Who?
Joey Dorsey, man.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there, but Joey,
He wanted to get paid.
I don't know the full details, but
I can tell you that.
When Joey and I had spoken briefly this offseason, he was interested in getting back on the staff.
Did they do a better job? I imagine. Now, you've been looking at the numbers. You're a numbers guy, analytics guy. The numbers are horrible.
They're atrocious.
Okay. Do you remember the numbers off the top of your head? I don't think you have the numbers in front of you from last year as far as rebounding.
I do not remember last year.
But I don't remember it being a problem.
Not this bad. No.
Right? It wasn't.
It wasn't this bad. However, when Malcolm went down, I think it was mid-December against Alabama and didn't come back until February, whatever, against Houston. There was a stretch there where it got ugly, especially when DeAndre was in foul trouble because it was the same situation, right? Malcolm's not healthy. DeAndre's off the floor.
But look how small they were.
Exactly.
Right?
And they were holding their own.
DeAndre did his job. DeAndre did his job. But those guys like Kennedy, they were crashing the board. They were doing – who were a couple of those other guys last year that I thought, wow, they played so hard. And it goes back to what Tim said. Sometimes it's effort. And a lot of times it's effort with rebounding. It's being in the right position like you talked about with Millsap, knowing the angles.
Especially against the Alabama States of the world. No disrespect.
Exactly. Okay. Ole Miss this Saturday at the Pavilion. Ole Miss is undefeated. Going into the Tuesday night game. So tonight they're playing NC State. This is their first real challenge of the season. Not that NC State is a ranked team, but they're talented. They're an ACC team. They're always solid. This is part of the ACC SEC challenge. We'll get more of an understanding of where Ole Miss is. But they do have Chris Beard. And forget about everything that happened away from the game. As far as X's and O's and between the lines, this guy is as respected a coach as anybody.
One of the best in the game, absolutely.
So even though we don't know a lot really about this Ole Miss team, despite them being undefeated, what do you expect?
Yeah. They haven't, to your point, they haven't really played anybody yet, right? I think they've got 6 wins against a bunch of cupcakes. Tonight, NC State is, a top 60 Ken Pom team, like you said, a middle of the pack ACC team. So we'll find out more about them there. I think, and we talked about this earlier on the radio and on your show, I think the size will be a factor in terms of, Mississippi having, big bodies there. If you go small with Jourdain and kind of counter that, bring a guy like Jamarian Sharp, out to the 3-point line, make him defend. I think that could be an advantage in Memphis' favor. But I think this is a game that Memphis should win comfortably.
Matthew Morrell is a Memphian who's struggling a little bit early this season, but he's had a really good career at Ole Miss. He's a guy that's going to be extremely jacked up to go off on the Tigers this Saturday. It always seems like they run into those guys, no matter who they're playing, that have the Memphis connection, that have career days against the Tigers. He's one guy to watch out.
To me, this is the start of a stretch where you need to go show yourself. I mean, they came off of 3 similar type games. They might have. Look, I'm not Mr. Ken Palm like our buddy over here, Parth.
Parth Palm.
They might have. It could be a Parth cast. I like that instead of podcast.
Yeah, nice.
They might. Do they have what? How does their non-conference schedule Parth rank in the country? The Tigers might have one of the toughest non-conference schedules, especially for a team in the American or lower. If that makes any sense.
I think you're absolutely right. Ole Miss, I haven't seen it, but I guarantee with what they've played so far, it's not that hard. But it's because they play an SEC schedule where they're going to play Kentucky,
right?
Where they're going to play Arkansas.
Yeah, they're going to get it on the back end.
Yes.
But my point is that I don't think people should get hung up on getting pounded by Villanova when you had 2 nice wins before. You might go down to Ole Miss and you win, and it's nice and it's awesome. But you don't judge what happens between now and whatever cupcake they have at Christmas time.
Austin P. Don't call him a cupcake.
Vanderbilt also is a cupcake. Let's just be real.
But you don't judge single games at this stage of the season. See how they come out of this stretch, because you're not going to knock off every one of them. Ole Miss and Texas A&M and the list go Virginia and Clemson, and let's go. You're not going to knock off every one of them. But if you come out of this stretch feeling good about yourself, you've done your job, you've taken care of your resume building, you toughen your team, you just want to be sitting pretty going into American play.
Yes, but here's the thing. I mean, again, we go back to the poll, right?
Right.
And then look at the bracketologists out there, and there are many of them. Again, it's not the end-all be-all. We're sitting here taping this on November 28th.
Right.
But I see Memphis as a 9 seed. I didn't get that. I said as a 9 seed.
Siri chiming in.
Siri, come on now. So
Tigers are a 7 seed. I mean, to your point, same neighborhood, but 7 seed in ESPN's latest bracketology.
Okay, and that's you want to be 7 or better. You do not want to be 8 or 9 or 10. And they already, like, again, I'm hammering this home. They got wins over Missouri, Michigan, Arkansas. It's pretty impressive. Yet, a lot of the things I looked at, a lot of the bracketologists have as a 9 right now.
I think a 7 is fair, in my opinion, based off what they've done. You know, solid body of work, super impressive to where you should get a top 5 seed. No, of course not.
Right.
It'd be absurd to say that.
7's fine, but I'm referring to the ones I saw where it was a 9. And to Tim's point, which he's absolutely right, you can't judge everything right now. We're just doing that because that's all we have. This is all we've seen so far. But you can't, as daunting a schedule as it is, we know that the conference schedule is weak sauce. I mean weak. You got Florida Atlantic. By the way, people who counted them out because they lost to Bryant, they've gone on to beat Texas A&M, destroyed. Who was it?
34 points.
Was it Virginia Tech?
Yes, a decent Virginia Tech team by 34 points.
This is a really good team. Memphis has 2 chances against them, maybe a third in the conference championship game. You would assume that they would meet. But the rest of that schedule is not helpful. It could only hurt you if you lose. So therefore, you have to go crazy in the non-conference portion of your schedule. So far, so good. Ole Miss is not a high RPI team, but they're playing at home at the Pavilion. It's a road game. But still, you have to win that game. You go to VCU. VCU is not a great team. You need to go to Richmond and win that game. Now, Texas A&M is a roadie that you'll be an underdog, I'm sure, because you're playing right now the 14th ranked team in the nation. Florida Atlantic just beat those guys and scored about 95 or 96 on that.
Yep.
That would be huge for Memphis to get that win. But again, going back to what Tim said, you're not going to win all of them. But if you're going to win any of them, take care of business against the teams you're expected to win against because they're all road games. And
wait, time out. That's exactly what Ryan Silverfield has done, and that's not good enough for a lot of people.
They've beaten nobody. I'm sorry. I don't cover football, so I don't know the ins and outs, but they have beaten nobody.
But you just said beat who you're expected to beat. Like you have to do that, but you have to do more than that too.
What I'm saying is with their schedule that they have, this is the Parth's point, with the schedule that Memphis basketball has, if you're beating these teams, you're going to be favored against a lot of them. It's going to help your resume when it comes to seeding that you're going to be seeded much better than 10 or 9 or 8.
I'm just saying if they lose,
can make a run in the NCAA
if they lose to an Ole Miss or a VCU, but you knock off a Clemson and a Texas A&M and a Virginia, it's a little easier to stomach those earlier ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, with football, which is, again, a separate podcast that you could check out with Frank Bonner, Tim Buckley, and myself, they had 3 teams that were favored against them, and all 3 of those teams beat Memphis. Memphis was not favored against Arkansas. They already won a game against the Arkansas Razorbacks. I'm not sure. I think Michigan may have been favored, a slight favorite.
I believe
it was 1.5 points. I forget who was the favorite.
I believe Michigan was a 1.5 point favorite.
You're going to have opportunities, but you have to take advantage of it in the non-conference because you're not going to get those opportunities in conference play. But you have at least those opportunities. You have Clemson at home. You have Virginia at home. Like you said, Vanderbilt is not a great team by any stretch, but they're an SEC team. You have VCU
on the road. Tough environment
Ole Miss,
there,
which is on the road. Texas A&M on the road. That's a big one against Texas A&M. A Texas A&M win on the road is one of those when the committee gets together, they go, hey, we're jumping them up a line.
That's top of the resume. Highlight it, bold it, italics, whatever. That's what
you're expected to beat Ole Miss because, and I haven't seen the line. Have you seen the line for the game?
Is there a line yet? I don't think it's not even out yet.
It's probably not even out. Memphis is going to be the favorite. They're going to be expected to go in there and win. They're going to be the favorite at VCU. They're going to be an underdog at Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm. So Ken Pom has it, and I know Tim's going to laugh at me. Ken Pom has it as a 75-70 win for Memphis against Ole Miss. I think Memphis needs to win by more than that. I think the way these games look matters, man. Like, especially in today's day and age where bracketologists are using computers and data and all that kind of stuff to to seed these teams, offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, that kind of thing. I think it can't be ugly, right? Like it can't be, beating them by 2, on a last minute.
Tim, the style points matter?
I think we should have done the disclaimer that Parth actually has some stock in Ken Palm. Parth loves him some Ken Palm. And for the record,
I like the numbers, man.
I also think you said that there's a million bracketologists out there. There's only one bracketologist out there. It's Lunardi. It's Joey Brackett. It's like, no.
Hey, wait a minute now. Jerry Palm is my buddy who comes on my show every week.
Actually, all right.
My radio show.
All right,
I think Palm has the higher hit rate as well.
I'll give you 2 bracketologists, but if the over under is 3, I'm taking the under and I ain't giving you a million bracketologists.
Well, yeah. Kerry Miller, who's actually a weekly guest during the baseball season, covers college basketball as well for Bleacher Report. He's the one who had him number 9 as a 9 seed today.
And that seems low, like we said.
And it does seem low, but it's so early in the game, so it's understandable. All right. So next week is going to be busy with VCU and then the trip to Texas A&M. We'll talk about it next week. We'll recap the game against Ole Miss. Again, 1 o'clock Saturday, Tigers, Ole Miss at the Pavilion. Parth, good stuff as always. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. It was fun.
Tim, as always, my friend.
I'm glad I could stay out of trouble today, Greg.
I don't know. You caused a little bit of trouble. That'll do it until next week. Thanks for listening, folks. And be sure to check out our other podcast, the Daily Memphian's Food Podcast, Sound Bites. It's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes is about arts, culture, and everything in between. And the Grizzlies Podcast, also hosted by Chris Harrington with Drew Hill. All of our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Have a great week, everybody.